Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this highly requested meetup with a talk from Lego. I'm Tina Øved, and I'm going to be your host for today. And we are very happy to see so many people joining online again today. And we, of course, hope that you have had a lovely morning so far. This time, we're welcoming Thomas Visby Snitker. Thomas is one of the heavyweights within UX research and has experience from various organizations. And for the past 7 years, he has been working with UX research in Lego. And he has also just published his new book, User Research with Kids, Thomas, and I'm looking very much forward actually to reading that one. And I hope that I can have some, like a bit of insights of what is going on in the book as well. I have some questions, of course, but we'll see if we have time for that. Thomas will share his experience with user research and how we as UX designers and researchers can contribute to value creation in our organizations. So the agenda for today is that when I'm done with all the practicalities, Thomas will start his talk. As always, we'll try to keep track on time. We know this is very important to you, so we will try to do our best. You can ask questions in the QA section just below here in Zoom, but due to time constraints, we just have time for a couple of questions at the end of the sessions. At the end of the session. However, we will continue past 10 if we have more questions. And no worries if you cannot stay after 10, we are recording the whole session, so we will send that out in the next couple of weeks. And Thomas, I actually don't know, we didn't discuss that yesterday, but will you share your slides, or is that completely confidential?
I think people should email me or connect on LinkedIn and request them if they're interested.
Sounds great. So do that. I know this is a very interesting topic, so definitely connect with Thomas. And for those of you who don't know Preely is a self-service platform for unmoderated remote user tests. It consists of 3 areas where you can create and distribute your test, you can host your test panel, and you can assess different test data and analytics as well. And we collect most usability and UX metrics. And we're also hosting meetups like this one. We're actually going on holiday, but we'll be back at the end of August, in the beginning of September, where we also hope to host these meetings physically, both in Copenhagen and Aarhus. And we will also keep them virtually for those of you who cannot join in those 2 cities. So I think that was all the practical stuff, and welcome to you, Thomas. I'm very happy to see you here and have been looking very much forward to this talk about Lego and user research. So take it away.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tina. And good morning, everyone. I'm in Copenhagen, so I don't know if it's your morning or whatever it is. But anyway, yeah, I have chosen the title Customer-Centric Research. And this talk is less about toys and testing with children and test methodologies. It's more maybe about evangelizing customer centricity and hopefully making it easier for you in your organization, in your work, to advocate for user centricity. So that's my aim, that you can help maybe your organization love your customers more, or I don't know where you're all sitting, but this is a cartoon. You can see it's the profiles, but here you have me in face, so that's why I chose that one. It's a little old, 10 years old, but the hairline is sort of the same. What's new for me is that I've just launched a book, yay, called User Research with Kids. It sort of sums up what I've been doing for the last 7 years at Lego from a methodological point of view. It's not a book about Lego per se. I intentionally chose to not use examples from my work, because it's usually very confidential, but it's sharing the mindset that I'm also talking about in this presentation, how as an organization we can mature, how we can leverage maybe even digital transformation in an age where companies are constantly challenged to come up with new ways to innovate, new ways to produce their products, etc. My own background before Lego, I had my own company for 10 years in Copenhagen, where I ran user research We had one very large customer. They were called Nokia. They made mobile phones. And that sort of grew and grew, and we had them as a global account. So we did user research all over the world, taught us a lot, but also it declined. And at that time, actually, Lego came in as a customer and started growing with sort of the same aspirations of facing globalization, digitalization, etc. So I thought that was a very cool challenge to engage myself in. So that's why I joined Lego 7 years ago. I will try this experiment of showing a video.
K. No, that's a K.
Y O M U. Trash can.
So I've chosen to show you this video. I hope the audio came through, but he's spelling out sometimes the right letters. But obviously the idea here is that you can't fool kids. They know it's a trash can. You can write thank you, you can write whatever you want. It's a very fun audience to be working with. And I need to go to the next slide here. So that's sort of the design area, the innovation area that I'm working in on a daily basis. I've shown some work examples here from the top left. It's Lego Live, our major social media app for children. It's a safe environment that we've worked extensively on, and that a lot of my work has been focused around for the last maybe 7 years actually, pretty much. We also have a TV app, so we are also on TV platforms, which is obviously another UI or another platform. And we have other apps. I'm showing the building instructions app, our coding app. Then we have a bunch of themed app like Star Wars. And then we have recently launched an app to control a coding experience for younger children from 6 to 10 years old called Boost. It's actually really impressive to see how easy kids can get into coding, which was very interesting to me personally. The middle section with the architecture model is to show that we do a lot of research with children. No, with adults. It's not just children, and that's the rightmost column is Lego Life, Lego.com for children. So obviously, a lot of focus is on the kids' experiences as well. And so the minifigure in the middle, he is reading our magazine. We also have printed materials that we test, and also packaging design. So how the form factor, how different visual elements in product packaging we also test. So you could say I came out of usability in UX, but now I'm also working on other platforms that are not digital at all, actually. But obviously a lot of it is digital. And here's, if we talk about Lego Live, what are the sort of the main questions that I work with is how we make something into an optimal user experience. So we work in all the phases from very early, from idea, conceptual to post-launch. We work iteratively, agile. We work with quick and dirty studies. I have a cat that needs to get out. Yep, the cat did it. Thank you, cat. When you're a cat owner, you do crazy stuff. So we do the quick and dirty, small sample, quick turnaround, maybe just a day of studies, but we also do more. If one thing is quick and dirty, maybe the other is slow and clean. So we do larger studies, longitudinal studies, large audience around the globe, etc. And we need to cover all the platforms. We also need to know what the competition is doing. We need to work on a global scale because kids and upbringing and parents' roles are very different globally. And then I also work on the UX score, or actually a KX, a Kids Experience score, that I also talk a lot about in the book, so you can read more about it there. So just to show sort of a scribble of where my main focus is in this circle, in the very fuzzy front end of experimentation with different approaches. There's a lot of, my customers call it A/B testing, and I call them customers because we're in an agency within Lego. So that means we have sort of a customer-client relationship to our colleagues, even though everyone's Lego. We call them customers. But yeah, so they try things out, and they call it sometimes, I'd like an A/B test, which is for me a very defined thing in sort of in a digital perspective, conversion rate tracking, etc. But for them, they just mean they have variations in visuals, or variations in content, or variation in scope. So we do that a lot. It's not always a straightforward progression, but it works in a large company like Lego with a very defined timeline, and so everything is sort of time boxed, and it can be really hard to get around those, because the gift giving season is pretty you know pretty much when the gift season is. We need boxes on shelves in stores in November and December in the Christian markets that celebrate Christmas, and there are other gift giving seasons that are very well prepared. So we don't want the boxes to arrive late. So everything sort of goes back from there. And the innovation actually is also geared to that. So I'll speak more about that a little later. But you can see the fuzzy front end, the F phase, as we call it, generates hundreds and hundreds of ideas. We get ideas through technology, through user research, through ethnography. We also get ideas through our fans. We're a pretty unique company in that way. We have a portal called Lego Ideas, where fans, if they built something cool out of Lego, they can submit it to the portal, and other fans can vote. And if it gets 5,000 votes, it gets a review. If it gets 10,000 votes, it gets a formal Lego design review with the intention of actually putting that product on the market. And so the fan would earn a share of the revenue from that particular product. So it's sort of crowdsourced that way. But from the green to the blue phase, we need to cut down of all these fantastic number of great ideas. And usually it boils down to maybe 30 or 40 products that are vetted. And I'm very much involved in that process. Then it matures, and then it launches. We have maybe in the vicinity of 700 SKUs, individual packagings, per year, so it's quite a lot, but usually they fall into series with maybe 8 or 10 or 15 products in each. I must say, if we're fairly strong in sort of the innovation part, my department is not so super strong in the post-launch phase, where we monitor. Obviously, we monitor the sales of the products very well, and the NPS, etc. But the experience once the product is on the market, let's say a Lego Super Mario product or a Lego video product, those are some of the new brands we have. How does it perform? Do people play with it? We could do more with learning after launch. Anyway, that's this detraction. What I want to talk about today is sort of two major areas. One is how we create value through a customer-centric approach, and the second half is sort of how you hear some suggestions on how you can contribute. Maybe you already do these 5 things, then you can lean back and drink some coffee instead. But those are some examples I've tried to work with in my company. So the main challenge you could say are the main question, and this is my CEO, that as a researcher or a UX person, I need to answer is why he should invest and trust that UX and research can develop his business. So I have some thoughts about that. So if I meet him, I will tell him, oh yeah, you need to understand UX. It's user experience. It's important how the users experience things. You also need to understand search engine optimization and information architecture and sort of business intelligence and click-through rates and the NPS and other TLAs, three-letter abbreviations that we have a lot of. And that's actually also the acronym for my department, the Lego agency. But what it really boils down to is the return on investment. So when he looks at me, he doesn't look at UX or UI or BI or all that. He looks at the return on investment. And maybe this is an interesting frame of mind to have once you look at how you develop your organization. So there's a good phrase in English that doesn't really work in Danish, but so you are the investment part seen from your CEO's point of view. So you need to do something with that investment. And in English, you can say you pay attention or you pay respect. So I think that's a good way to look at how can you deliver value. It is by returning on that investment. And that's through this empowering the business with customer insight and customer experiences. So let's take a look at that. Here's a very nice drawing. It's not the most recent one probably, but it's by Susan Weinschenk it doesn't say any here. It's from Human Factors anyway. I think the logo was wrong, but yeah, she's from Human Factors, a large consultancy. And I don't want to take you through all of the ways that you can consider the return on investment, but here's a few of them. That through research we have a very strong tool to do things that the organization needs. Because if you look at where the user sits in this diagram, he requests cherries, but through the customer, sort of the dimensions are described. I want how many, how should they be packaged? And then that needs to be translated to the developer in order for the developer to design and to bring this to the user. So those dimensions that may be communicated poorly through this process. And also different stakeholders than developers exist in organizations, which is something I also encounter every day, that some are worried about the consumption, and maybe some think it's another fruit that actually the user wants, and some worry about pests. So I think a very ignored part of a user researcher's job is to run stakeholder interviews. So suggestion, talk with your stakeholders. This is what research roles that I often apply. I stand there with the lab coat and take notes when people are eating the pie. How much do they leave on the plate? What do they spit out? Maybe I listen to their conversations. Or in user-centered design, where we ask them on board and we design together with them as much as possible. They come up with the recipe, or they give us insights on how it best meets their needs. So that's certainly the way we approach it. But speaking of the return on investment, there are actually many metrics that we can apply, and that's the bottom part. From conversion, how many browsers become shoppers, how many register, how many abandon, how many call our customer service, how many need training, and how much do we need to invest in this training. And simply by making great user experiences, people use them more. So that's also a strong metric. It saves time for the audience. It saves time for the developers, because the developers don't need to go back and redesign something that didn't work the first time. So, and then it reduces errors. And I think sometimes that's something we ignore a little bit as advocates of user centricity, that errors and pain is actually quantifiable. So I have an example. It's the nuclear missile attack. There's a very alarming video there on YouTube. It's a TV show, a news show, where they show some footage from the example I'll be showing, and then there's also a link that you can peruse later. So it's in January 2018, and it's in the morning on Hawaii. It's a Saturday morning, and suddenly this broadcast chimes on all the phones of Hawaii. 1.5 million people, plus obviously all the tourists. If you're watching the Premier League, Tottenham is leading at halftime, but also it says that the civil authority has issued a very severe alarm about an imminent nuclear missile attack. And when I saw these pictures, I thought, why is it only shown in such a small banner? Wouldn't it be better to get rid of the football game? Anyway, so a few minutes pass, and then mom calls. Actually, she's called twice in 2 minutes. But it turns out there was no missile attack imminent. They had to tell everyone everywhere that, you know, it was a false alarm on the highways, and also they sent out a new message back to people that it was a false alarm. So it was like 30 odd minutes in utter panic. Everything broke down in Hawaii. People ran for shelters. What should they do with their parents? What should they do with their kids? All that. And it turns out the reason was this user interface, that this was actually the system that governed sending out missile threat attacks. This is what it looked like. And sort of, if you look at the different alert types, which are the where you test the system and which are actual missile alarms, really hard to tell. So no wonder people got that wrong. And some people in the UX community did a very quick redesign, and that's what it looked like. So, you know, grouping real alerts with, and with tests, and also error management, the lower part, actually what if you send out one mistaken, and also just having this, are you sure you want to send this out to everyone? So errors are actually a huge benefit for us as UX advocate to remind stakeholders that, you know, if you don't, you can lose your reputation, you can lose so many things by these major errors. So invest in that. All right, so this is the second half where I have 5 tips and tricks for you on how you can engage your stakeholders. One thing I often do is I write reports in PowerPoints, but something I've done more and more recently is actually, yes, I'll have the documentation, but I will turn it into a quiz. So I'll use Kahoot. For instance, I don't know if you're familiar with Kahoot. It's very popular in Denmark in the school system. What you can do, this is just an example in sort of the lower half of this screen, where I ask trivial questions about what we do and get people up to speed through these multiple choice answers. It's really engaging, and it sort of uses this drive to compete that my stakeholders have, that they want to, you know the most and be the best. And be the most informed. So that's one suggestion. Another one, which is maybe not easy for all brands. It's proven very easy for Lego to do this, but it's actually getting rid of the comfortable office furniture and inviting people in to respond, and inviting people in to be part of testing or so, but actually going out and living with your audience and that way learning thing. So, but it obviously requires different steps. So number one, you need to know where your customers are and where they hang out. And maybe it can be tricky, yeah. And the next one is that a convenient location for you to set up some tests physically? Maybe you can even get your colleagues or your stakeholders to join you and listen in out there. And maybe you can even enable them to experience firsthand how the customers experience your products. And the last opportunity there is maybe your stakeholders can actually have some simple research tasks so that they take survey style sort of questions or responses from your audience. And here's an example. It's quite unique for Lego, and this is obviously pre-COVID, so this was 18 or 19. Lego World is a huge event in Copenhagen in the winter vacation, 4 days, where kids and families immerse themselves in Lego physically. And that's the poster for Lego World on the right. It's a large event with maybe 40,000 visitors over those 4 days. One camp that we've set up is a test camp. So a part of this area, you can be invited as when you're visiting the event, you can come and try out new Lego. And so what I called it internally is UX researcher for a day. So I've asked my designers, my stakeholders to join, meet us before it all opens for a briefing, and then join the sessions throughout the day. And then from the event opens at 10 till it closes at 5. There's ample opportunity to experience firsthand what the respondents experience. So this is just an example from one day, a Friday, how our layout was, that we could actually have 10 or sometimes up to 15 different projects together in sort of the same general area, where they would sit very simply at a table and engage with the kids with their prototypes. So this is the environment. It's very, when I say camp out, yeah, it is very close to. So this is my colleague Martin on the day before the venue opens. These are all incentive boxes. This is an area for the Duplo toddlers. These are all my colleagues. They get name tags and registered. They get T-shirts and bracelets. There's a reception area where the families, once they come in, they need to register. We have, maybe we have some NDAs, or certainly we do have some consent forms since the kids are joining. So this is some pictures of the different stands. And there's also a waiting area for where do we store the parents while the kids are testing our things, so they can sit here and just build along the way. There is one drawback that we maybe crowded the kids a little too much once in a while. So with 4 researchers hovering around one small child is maybe overdoing it a little bit. So it's not the most precise testing. It has its pros and it has its cons. Here's just a few more pictures. And this is in Billund, the Tuesday after the event, where my colleague Pia and my colleague Rune are presenting the findings from the session there. And you can see there were a fairly large attendance of colleagues. So having an event might be a way for you to have quick and dirty feedback just in volume and have a quick turnaround. Obviously, it requires some investment again. So this is just how it looked on the planning sheet, who from our end participated, what was the stimulus, and obviously each type of study had its own agenda and test groups. Here are just some more pictures from that. This was to talk about the more informal, quick and dirty testing, get some quick answers from respondents, but we also did a larger study at LEGO World with DTU, the Technical University of Denmark. On the left, it's John Paulin, who's a eye tracking specialist, where we tested in a sort of more formal setting in the same venue, but sort of in a discrete area, how on the top left, kids using eye tracking glasses, how they built the same model on a paper building instructions versus on the right on a digital version. And I have some examples of that. So here, one has he has the app, he has the paper, he also has the app. And what we studied was how much of the kids' attention was on the physical model and how much was on the building instructions. And this is to fuel a debate that's ongoing in LEGO about how much we should focus on digitalizing our building instructions, or should we keep them as the book that you're probably familiar with if you have seen the LEGO product. So this is how the interface was. There's a menu, there's a one-on-one, there's some sliders and some navigation there, and then there's the model. So how much of the time did the audience spend looking at the model, trying to figure out where to put things, and how much did they look for the instructions? And the idea is that we want to design the building experience so that it's challenging enough that it's interesting and engaging, but not too challenging so that they make mistakes and regress and hesitate or have a bad experience. So it needs to be not to be boring and not to be too challenging. And here are the examples with different cohorts of respondents that we brought in from LEGO World. And just yeah, we're talking about camping out. LEGO has a unique opportunity because of LEGO World, but I don't know if if your brand supports a similar thing. But just consider where the consumers are. This is Roskilde Festival pre-COVID. There's a lot of customers there. There are customers everywhere. Maybe they are attending sports events, and we only need to sleep twice before we meet Finland in the European Cup. Did you think of that? I'm thinking of gas stations is a good place to meet pretty much everyone. They might have a couple of minutes there. It's not a LEGO World. It's just a gas stop. This is a convention center. Maybe if you're a B2B, maybe your customers, if you're business customers, maybe they sit in conventions from time to time. And it's very easy. There's very little hassle in camping out. You need to see 1, 2, 3, how easy it is to get a tent, and they're not very expensive. So camping out, the return on investment is very large. You can maybe gamify some of the evaluation process. Obviously, evaluation process is often considered the testing we do with our consumers, but here are some other considerations on how you can promote user centricity actually without having any users. You can have the stakeholders, probably mainly the designers, and developers, but maybe also others be more aware of the user experiences they are producing. So we set out thinking, oh yeah, we'll just score. We'll go through all the user experiences we produce. we'll score them based on these heuristics. We have maybe 250 or 260. For instance, if it's a website, the site is free from irrelevant, unnecessary, distracting information, and you can score that on a scale from 1 to 5 maybe. And then once you've completed all these 240 something inspection points, you get a nice score on the right. Maybe you can present them in a nice spiderweb kind of display or similar. And we thought, oh yeah, our designers wants to do that. We'll just make it as simple as that. But the designers didn't want to do it, and we weren't staffed to be able to go through all the products that we had. So we ran a workshop with designers and developers, and one called Megan came back with you need to make this this self-evaluation tool that is gamified, and you can call it the Evaluatron. Call it something cool. So this is the version, a very early version, where we made cards. So we thought on each card we would write an inspection point, and we would tier it so that in tier 1, the base game, those were the essential inspection areas. Like, yeah, is it easy to navigate the website, for instance? So we would make different packs or expansions packs of cards. But we quickly found out the cards just a mess, you know, and the designers, they don't keep track of the cards. The cards go everywhere, and so we made it into a board game instead. And this is the first version of the board game, where we had different tiles where you would progress through the board game in a group of 2, 3, 4 designers or stakeholders, and discuss the user experience, like walking in the footsteps of a fictitious user, where you up in maybe step 5, you would say, which scenario are we in? The car? Are we at home? Are we with friends? In which country are we? Etc. etc. So that you sort of are able to pick different approaches to it, which age range, which gender, and so on. So that's the first idea of the board. Then then we played it. You can see some examples from Lego where we played it in different variations, and also got some help actually from the IT University of Copenhagen to develop the game, or the self-evaluation game here. So this is actually the finished version 1, where you see how the use case is that a designer has come up with something new or wants to take stock of the existing product they have. And if it's a website, we have a web edition, we also have an app edition and a game edition. So each evaluation systems are different. But in the use case, the designer collects 3 or 4 colleagues, prints this, sits down with colors and pens, and plays through. And I'm just going to click through it quite quickly, because I can see I'm running out of time a little bit. But this is sort of where it ends. So during the discussions, the designers, or the players, in this case of Evaluatron, have come up with ideas, and maybe I can show yep, I can write a text here. So maybe we found that the website is hard to navigate. It's a little too abstract, but if you think of a little more concrete example, and then you would say, how problematic was that? Well, that was a significant problem. So I'll put it over here, and I'll give it a number. And then in the subsequent, I just need to go to the subsequent slide. I'll need to close that. Come along. Those findings from that long list of individual results would be placed in a metric based on how much effort on the horizontal axis. Does it require a lot of effort to fix it, or lit, and how impactful it is on the vertical axis. So you would obviously focus on those that you could fix now, rather than those you would never fix. So that's an example. Why can't I get rid of this text? Sorry about that. Annotate, clear all drawings. All right. Another example I have is very practical from my point of view as a researcher with a global task and global challenge. It's hard to have legs and arms and heads to actually reach all the areas that we need. So what I've set up is an internship program in LEGO in research, where this is an illustration some years back where they each built themselves as LEGO minifigures, and apparently I'm the one in front with the round glasses. But this semester I had 8 virtual interns because of COVID. So they actually sat and did their user research in their local community. But next semester I have as many as 15 students, some from Aalborg, some from Aarhus, some from Kolding, some from Copenhagen, and one from Stockholm, that are all in their sort of a bachelor or master's part of their studies, but who are interested in research. And maybe that's an idea for you, that you sort of cultivate a program where you could say crowdsource in a way talent and people who are interested in research or in UX. So that's a 4th suggestion. And the 5th one is something I did a couple of years back, where I started a consumer experience academy. So I asked my my boss, how can we leverage this user experience awareness around our organization? And we thought, well, it needs to start with the individuals in our groups. So we have around 350 people in our department, and the idea was to inspire and increase their learning, and so that you could look at it from an individual point of view, but as the agency in general, that would be a big step forward. We set it up so that each person per year would spend 10 to 20 hours. So not a lot, but still enough that they need to prioritize it, and that they could be exposed to various activities that they chose themselves. So, for instance, I would hold master classes on research, but my colleague Torben, who's a SEO expert, he would run on search engine optimization. Other topics were like analytics, strategy, content, quality, etc., etc. And here, back to the return on investment part and how you talk to the CEO. The investment here is pretty minimal, because the speakers, the masters in the academy, and they are probably specialists, and probably the CEO has hired them because they're smart and they know their stuff. So you leverage their knowledge on a broader scale through an academy. So that's an idea that was very successful. So these were the questions, and I think I spent a little more time than I planned. Sorry about that. But Tina can clean up this mess.
Of course, or something. I think this was very, very interesting, and I think it goes very much hand in hand with a lot of the stuff I've also seen in other organizations actually, and the whole idea of starting, for instance, measuring UX and have these UX metrics and KPIs and so on. That's something that resonates very well with where I am right now, but also what I hear in other organizations. So I think this was quite interesting, and I actually loved the Snitker army, and and I know this is I've worked in other organizations where that was exactly the same issue, right? Where you need more hands, and how do you get hands? You have interns in to help you, and also just to have this fresh blood going in. And that's actually a question I have, because you said this whole you evaluated the UX yourself, so you actually tried to equip internal people to do some of the stuff. Like, were you worried about the results from that one, that they were too blind for what was going on and was too much like into the matter in order to actually being like, take this more helicopter perspective and say, okay, there's actually something wrong here? Yeah,
exactly. And there's a lot of bias that way. So we learned throughout some prototype testing that in the group, you need to have outsiders. You can't just have the 4 designers who produced this design evaluating them, because obviously if they thought that design didn't work, they would have changed it a long time ago. So you need to you need to mix people up and have outsiders join the group, so you get an outside perspective.
Yeah, I've seen exactly the same, because we also had an idea that how hard can it be? We can do it ourselves. We have a handful of UX experts, so we'll just make like configurations and cognitive walkthroughs, boom. And then we compared it to like outsiders, and it was like, right?
Yeah.
So it's so, and I think it's so interesting also to hear that you have this like internal, like you have this this intern program going on to also have new ideas and new thoughts into the development. Yeah. So guys, you can ask questions in the QA. I have a lot of questions, of course, because I think this was so interesting. So you work like right now, to like very close to my heart is, of course, like in general measuring UX and quantifying experiences and so on, putting numbers to things instead of having it too qualitative and so on. So I think it was quite interesting that you start talking about like these different metrics that you measured. So I have a lot of questions about that, of course, but one thing is that when do you actually start measuring? Like when do you have anything where you actually say, okay, now it's mature enough to start measuring, or is that just at the end, or how do you do this?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I'm not sure I have the final answer for that, but some of the ways we explored that is through prototype testing and focusing on behavior. So it's really hard when you test with children to rely on their verbal feedback, because it's not always very consistent. So you want to make tasks, and so it's only really applicable once the prototype supports tasks. So maybe your prototype is, if it's clickable, for instance, okay, there could be tasks in that. For instance, you could ask kids after that, what did the prototype ask them to do, what was required by them, and then you can sort of tick off and say to which degree did they come up with the right answer, if there is a right answer. But if it's, so that's task related, but a lot of challenges there are when the product is more experience oriented. There is no task, you just go there and have fun. So you look for indicators of fun. And one indicator could be that they stay with the experience and stay with the product, and don't just, so how much time do they spend with it? Also, how engaged are they during their experience? Are they mildly engaged? Is it if you have multiple kids, for instance, do they engage between them around the product? Does the product spark new play? Does it spark new conversations? So I guess on one level, you can start the metrics when the prototype supports tasks, or when the prototype supports experiences, so that it's not about what they expect from it. You can't really use a lot of the verbalization techniques that you would use in user research otherwise, and that would be super meaningful, but it's just not really well for scoring.
And what about like the metrics you're measuring? Because you mentioned like some of the stuff where it's very like, pragmatical and very like down to the task as well. But I also collecting more hedonic metrics as well, because when we're in the space of user experience design, that's normally, that tends to be very important.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked, because I've written a book about it.
Oh, that sounds great,
commercial here, but there's a chapter on how we develop this kids experience score, and some of the hedonistic indicators are curiosity. For instance, are they curious to explore? If it's an app like Lego Life, do they keep looking at different features and things or not. So if you have a given, it's maybe too complicated to go through it now, but if you have a given product and it supports curiosity or learning in some ways, you can maybe come up with some indicators that support, for instance, how curious they are. It could be obviously time spent. It could be how many features have been seen, etc., etc. So you come up with all these, and then you test it with different cohorts, maybe different age group, different genders, different cultures, maybe with parents when it's a kid experience. So curiosity is one. Familiarity is another one, and that's sort of a conceptual familiarity. If the app looks like an app, or if it looks more like a game, or it looks more like an educational system, or for instance, for Lego, we sometimes find that if we launch an app to kids, kids think app equals game. It must be a game. But a lot of our apps are not games. They are building related. Yeah, so it's not a game. It's an app. So the familiarity is maybe less for the children when they think of building related apps, but it's high when they think of game related apps. So familiarity influences a lot on their experience if they have seen this type of product before. But it's also the thematical and semantic areas inside the experience. If we talk about an app, for instance, are there things that they have seen before and that they can sort of easily pick up on what is this app about? What is the themes? What is the stories? How should I interpret it? So little things that give clues to children about how they should use it. And are those clues, do they see them? Do they find them? So that's something you can also score. To which degree is it familiar to the audience? So we have 5 areas. 2 others are usability and sort of can they use the features as they're intended, and one is satisfaction, which is obviously a very well known indicator in user research. To which degree are they happy? And that's also challenging when you have children as your audience, because they might just say, on a scale from 1 to 5, they all say 5, 5, 5, 5. They will all say it's fun because you're stimulating them. The situation is stimulating. Was the app stimulating? Who cares? They had fun. So they can't give reliable indicators there. So we use the moderators and ask the moderators to ask in different ways to get more meaningful indicators on if it actually was a satisfactory experience for the children. Okay. That was a long answer. Sorry about that.
I think that's
something I care a lot about.
Because I started thinking, okay, are you planting some stuff in for instance in the app when you test, and then they need to reach that, and then you say, okay, like then you say, okay, if they reach this, then they will have a great satisfaction because they'll not reach that if they didn't, or something like that. So it's quite interesting to hear that you still make use of the facilitators in order to actually make some sort of translation of what is going on in the test, and then still have that layer of, like, in a way, humanity in the test as well, because that's often what I hear when we talk about putting numbers to experiences, that it's just like too cold and you don't have the human aspect anymore. And I definitely believe that's not true, but we hear that especially from people working very much with qualitative data. So we have a lot of questions coming in. Selena is asking, do you have any tips about how to treat colleagues who are not interested in this subject at all, the ones who would never voluntarily join an academy, who might think that UX is for UXers only, or is it just a waste of time? I think it's a good question.
Totally.
Yeah. I've actually, like, now I'm just taking over, but I have worked with this as well, right, where I taught software developers in these things. And it took, like in my experience, it took a bit of time to convincing them. And what we actually did was taking them to user tests and then actually showed them like how it was when a customer or a user didn't understand what they had been doing, and then when they saw that, they were just like so eager to go home and actually make some changes, and then they could see the value. So I think that would be my answer to this. But of course, Thomas, what do you say in this to this question?
Yeah, for instance, the example I had from camping out at events, maybe like Lego World or your gas station, is a way for but it requires obviously that the stakeholders will invest in it, and it's up to you as a UX or a research professional to find ways to lure them to make it worth their while. So you need to make it, maybe the first time it needs to be very convenient for them and very sort of time boxed, so they're not spending hours that are inconvenient for them. So make that a good user experience. Try to think of it in that, like a context of what will it take to make them. Maybe it's not the most precise study, or maybe it's not the most eloquent, or maybe actually the results are meaningless, but it's just the process of opening their eyes that is important.
And I also think it's very important to have like a certain level of UX knowledge within both the team and the organization in order to actually move the UX maturity up, because you simply can't not move the maturity up in an organization if you just have a handful of UX designers doing all the work. So having people understand both the benefits and also all the value it brings to the table, and also like just some minor tools so they can actually also talk about what their experiences as well, like having some sort of shared language. And that's definitely what I've seen myself, is that they don't know how to verbalize what they see, so it stays within in a way. So if you actually start like creating a language around them so they can actually verbalize the things, then it seems to leverage as well. Yeah.
And also I must say, maybe it's because I'm fortunate where I work, but it's something that happens less and less. I see there's really a strong, especially from the young people coming out of university, but also from managers, that now they prioritize user centricity, customer centric agendas much more.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. And we can also see it like just in job ads and so on, that companies are starting to look for people with these type of competencies as well. And then I just hope, like from my perspective, that they also bring in the quantitative approach, because it still seems to be very much heavy towards the qualitative approach, and in my experience that just makes it very, and I also think you brought that up in your presentation, Thomas, that makes it very hard to actually verbalize results and verbalize value within the organization, and especially to business, if you don't have hardcore numbers. So it's just important to also bring that to the table. So I will actually say that the time is up, but we'll keep talking after 10 o'clock. So I'll just say bye to the people who need to jump the meeting now and go on with their day. So Thomas, I think this has been very interesting. I'm looking forward to talk more afterwards as well. And thank you to all of you behind the screens. You of course were welcome to join the Q&A session that will continue going on after 10. And for those of you who are leaving, thank you so much for joining. And again, if you have any ideas or suggestions on how we can improve these meetups, or you have some ideas on some topics or some people that you would like to hear make a talk, let us know, and then we'll see what we can do. And then we will send a recording of the whole session in the next couple of weeks. And again, reach out to Thomas if you want his slides, then he will gladly share them. And then thank you for now. Thank you for joining, and have a great day. And we will keep going on in this meeting. So we have questions coming in. So we have, how do you organize research requests? How do you prioritize the needs to be done based on resources available?
I just say yes.
Yeah.
And I must figure out how to do it. Yeah. Sometimes, scaling things down or moving them a little bit, but I pretty much always say yes.
I think that's a great advice, actually. and again, I also think, and you also said that sometimes it does not need to be full blown. Like I think we have a tendency to say everything needs to be perfect, and sometimes it might be better just to do something and bring some results to the table.
One thing, I do get requests that are sometimes formulated suboptimal, where the client thinks they need a test like this, and they might call it something because that's what they experienced a month ago or 6 months ago or 12 months ago or something. And in their minds, they think maybe because they haven't done much research, they think that's how it's done. That's the only thing. You can only do this. You can only do a survey, or you can only do, well, I think the requests, I do spend a lot of time vetting the requests and sort of going through them with the client to try to understand the objective rather than the approach they want, because sometimes that approach is maybe overkill, maybe it's completely wrong, or it needs to fit the objective they have. So that's something I do with requests.
Have you ever experienced that when people come to you and say, okay, can we have this user test conducted, that it just lies between the lines that, okay, it needs to be a think aloud test no matter what? Yeah,
exactly. And sometimes, maybe they're better off scaling it up or down, or changing it to a more ethnographic approach, or maybe, and that's something actually I speak about in the book, that the way they ask it will not give the results they hope for. Maybe they have chosen too many things already, made too many decisions, and that they need to broaden their minds and step back a few times and look at other. And for instance, one request I often get is about the product itself, which is what they spend 99% of their focus on. But what about the context? The context, the marketplace, the competitors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I sometimes push back and say you need to understand the context better, because you focus only on your product. Sort of blind for context.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, but it's so interesting because I think we have been in the game, like in the same type of game, right? Because what I've also heard is they don't need a user test, they need a validation of the things they have been producing, right?
Yeah.
And that's just like, okay, we can also do that. And I have worked with medical devices where that was the case, of course, that we need to do that, but it's not, it just like sounds very wrong where we are at the development stage and what I know that you're actually looking for as well. But it just seems to have this like approved sign and then our stamp and then we're good to go, and they don't care at all about the results and if we need to change anything.
Yeah.
So we have a question more here that how do you get a foot in the door to start measuring UX? Do you need like permission from, for instance, stakeholders to test?
You don't ask permission, you just do it. You try as much as you can to build rapport over many smaller projects, so that you start proving that it has some value, because it won't be perfect the first time or the second time, or it'll take some time and also some volume, because a score requires a certain number of respondents. Maybe it needs respondents from different cohorts, etc. So and the first measurement may be totally irrelevant because you don't have anything to measure against. You don't have anything to compare with. So what you do is you start small and you build it up over several iterations, so that you customize your score, your metric, but also that you figure out what resonates with your organization, so that you make sure that it's not your score, but it's the organization's score, and so that stakeholders see their objectives reflected in the measurement.
Yeah,
that would be my first thoughts.
Yeah. And I think if you're completely new to start like measuring UX and usability, then a good way to start, I will say that the Google Heart framework, for instance, because there you can get a good discussion about some simple stuff that you might already be tracking within the organization, and then start there if you're completely new, and then of course make things your own. And what we did was like we started completely from scratch where we were before, and that was a bit like that was huge, even though we were used to working with quantitative data. So I definitely say that go for that one first, and then have the discussion, and then like mature it along the way, and have like see how things, as you said, Thomas, see how things resonate within the organization, because then you have a clear indication of what you need to measure and what doesn't matter, right? Yeah. So I'm jumping a bit around here. So Peter's asking, how do you oversee the huge amount of insights from 15 researchers? Good question.
Well, they do work on projects together or in teams or alone. You, for instance, use the score. You also use templates when you take in briefs from clients, so that you know pretty much you have streamlined those parts of the process that are meaningful to streamline. You also make sure that the researchers talk amongst each other. So you set up maybe topical corporations, or not corporations, groups, knowledge sharing, so that they can build some sort of volume of knowledge. So it's not just one researcher in a silo, another one in a silo, but that you build upon their experience. Yeah, I don't think it's a problem. I think I want 150 or 1,500 researchers rather than fewer. I think we have lots of things that we need to study and study, but of course I'm a researcher, so I just want to do more research. So.
Of course. How do you actually do it with interns coming in? Do you have like a starting program where you just like equip them with the things they need to know in order to send them out as well?
Yeah, and actually that's why I wrote the book also, because I kept repeating myself every semester when new people came in, especially about this phenomena of children and research with children, because they know about research with adults or with their peers, their 20-year-old student peers. So one is the topical and the research academy that I run with them. Another part is listen to what the previous interns did. And since we are now finishing one semester, the outgoing interns now are telling the incoming interns what they did, what challenges they met, how they approached it, what they learned, etc. So there's some peer learning that happens that way. And then it's also, you could say, taxing or demanding for my colleagues, because they need to introduce these new people to their tasks. But I think it's, yes, that's taxing, but it's also very beneficial in the sense that then my stakeholders need to reflect on research and what they've learned for the past semester with those interns, and how they can improve upon maybe the efficiency or maybe the scope of research, or change things. And then there's another interesting factor, that the interns are all, individual persons with different backgrounds. They come from different universities, but also just because of their individuality. That means some are very focused on maybe methods, other may be focused on types of products or platforms, etc. So they each come with very specific skill sets or focus areas. So that also makes each batch or each group of interns very unique. Yeah. So that you need to play upon their strengths and know where their superpowers are.
Yeah. I think that sounds amazing, right? I'm just seeing it for myself, like you're just having this knowledge base, and then you just add on new layers because you have a lot of people coming with their like niche specialty as well.
Yeah,
that's very
fun.
So Emma Sophie is asking, do you test with both children and grown-ups at the same time as a way to test UX in the collaboration between a child and parent?
Yeah, we pretty much do everything that's possible. We test also kids with their friends, kids with their siblings, kids with parents very much during COVID because it was so remote testing through a platform or just through synchronous moderated sessions through Teams or Zoom, etc. The problem with the parents is that the kids are disciplined when the parents are there. The parents tell the kids how to behave, and that's good because then we have well-behaved kids. That's very nice for research purposes, but it's not always the realistic, naturalistic behavior of children when their parents are watching over them. So it has pros and cons. It makes for little better than real testing environments, but a little less than real usage scenarios. So it's nice to complement it with studies without the parents, maybe in their schools, on their after-school programs, or at when they hang out with their friends, or at sports, or
Yeah.
So we do all of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Therese is asking, so she loves the ambition of making customized tools for everyone in the company to work with UX. And then her question is, do you have more tips about how to do that?
Yeah, and certainly something we have experimented with. A major tip is don't let the tool rule or put it in another way. Don't focus too much on the tool because it requires somebody, maybe you, I forgot her name, maybe because she needs to be invested in it. And how much can she be invested in, or her colleagues, or it requires a lot of nurturing, a lot of upbringing, a lot of constant care and feeding of these tools to keep them alive. And when you turn your back and focus on something else, it may die out. So just make sure that you don't introduce a lot of tools and then just leave it. Make sure you also have staying power, sustaining power, or something that reinforces it, keeps it alive, and maybe also brings it from one area of the organization to others, so that others can see the point of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think start small and start by bringing to the table that it actually is something that brings some sort of value. So maybe not bring out the heavy tools in the beginning, but maybe just say that, okay, the developers or whoever you're working with, take them out. So every time you're having an interview, every time you're having a test, try to take them by the hand and then let them observe what you're doing and observe which type of insights you're actually gaining from the stuff you're doing. And then they can see the value in it. And then it starts to resonate within their mind as well, that this is something they might need to do more often. And then hopefully they might start asking for it themselves. We have seen that before. So, yeah. So I think make sure that you're not dropping a huge bomb, because then it will never happen. So it's small steps, and then it takes a lot of time to raising the UX maturity within an organization. And I think that's also something that we need to be very much aware of as well. So people are like Kashmir says, saying that excellent talk. She loved it. That's nice to hear, Kashmir. Malene is asking, I think this has been great. I would like the slides. So Malene, you can have this. Yeah, we'll answer that one, or else reach out to Thomas on LinkedIn, and then you can have his slides through there. Lena is asking, who has the final say on design in Lego? Is UX all that matters, or is it often overruled by other agendas?
Yes, it happens, certainly. For instance, we had an example, maybe it's a good example. We had a very beautiful Lego Batmobile that was all black. But when we produced the building instructions, all these black tiles, you had to put them meaningful places, but it was just really hard to communicate it in print and in digital building instructions. All this black on black, you could say the user experience wasn't good enough, so that the design was actually, it was taken off the market later, just because it was a bad user experience. So sometimes it happens that the design trumps, or the timeline trumps as well, because Christmas will be when that's going to be. So you can move Christmas, and so I think that can be a challenge. How do we scale the product and also the user centricity activities through a process so that it fits the timeline? And as you go along learning about how much time does it take, that increases how much you can actually do, because projects get better and better prepared next season for how much time should they set aside, what are some contingencies, what can delay a product. So it's a learning, and I think also the sheer output from Lego and also the digitalization has really changed how Lego works. So there's a lot of learning ongoing and transformation. It really does change.
And you've never experienced that you've been overruled, like for instance by, I don't know, like
one thing that comes up is confidentiality, that it stands in the way of involving the audience, because has been so much problem with the copycats in China, that we tend to keep the experiences or the products concealed right up until launch, so that they can't even open the outer boxing in the shops until the day when it's launched, etc. And still leaks happen. So it's a super and those leaks, it takes the copycats maybe a week or two, and then they have copy products, and it's like crazy how fast it goes. So the organization is very alert on that, and sometimes I feel there's a conflict between involving audiences and then keeping IP or keeping designs confidential.
Yeah, but it's crazy how fast they are.
It really is.
Yeah. And we have a question more that is like in the same lines as the other one. So what pushback on UX have you experienced in Lego and Nokia, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, one is often that they fear it takes a lot of time and that it's very costly. So it has been my task constantly to come up with agile and low costs alternatives, so that they can obviously have the full scale, the proper, but also, for instance, like I mentioned some examples in my presentation with the camping out, that's very cheap, the academy, that's very cheap, the Evaluatron, it's very cheap again, very fast, and you can scale the effort there as much time as you have. So I'd like to have an answer every time they say we don't have time for that. Well, do you have an hour? Okay, we have an hour. Or we don't have the budget for that. Well, do you have 0 krona? Because I can do something for 0 krona. Okay. So, try to, all right, match different ambition levels because they will push back, and they may have very different agendas, and you need to respect that, I guess.
Yeah. What about how do you cater for different parts of the organization? For instance, like if business comes and asks for a test, are you then having like a variety of different methods that you use for those guys? And then if a product creation comes, then it's another set of
it usually is, and some departments require longer lead time because they need to produce materials for you. Others, they have just thoughts or ideas, so that takes very little time to prepare anything. So yeah, it's very diverse. It's fun that way, actually.
Yeah. And then I actually have a question, because I'm leaning more and more towards UX and business. So do you have any experience or great tips on how to actually talk UX into business? Of course, we have return of investment, but do you have other stuff that's just like, this works so great when you talk with the business side of the organization?
Well, it's I think it's simply aligning the business goals and the consumer or customers' goals so that those two are in line, and you can challenge them. If you see there is no alignment, you can say, is there actually a user need for this on the marketplace? And they will say yes. Okay, can you demonstrate how, or what's the evidence for that? Would you like me to provide some evidence for that? Because then maybe actually there's a need they have, they just don't, they may be a little shy of telling you it's actually a concern they have. Well, maybe you can inform them, and you can work together on it rather than having it as opposing forces.
Yeah, it makes sense. So we have a question here. Can you tell more about the heuristics you use in Lego? How did you reach more than 200?
Oh, it was, yeah, the heuristics for the Evaluatron were based on a company called User Focus in the UK, where his name escapes me. I think it's Paul Bow. I can't remember his name, but it was also something actually way back before I joined Lego. We compiled like a literature search. Of course, Jakob Nielsen has some heuristics. Ben Schneiderman had some. I had the digitalization board, the National Digitaliseringsstyrelsen, as a client in my company, and they had all these self-service solutions on Borger.dk or Virk.dk. So they needed to come up with some heuristics for how could these work, and we built a tool based on all those heuristics and also the ones from User Focus. So we compiled them all into one big and sort of weighed them. Which is more important? Is it more important this or that? So we built this tool, and that's actually what I brought into Lego as well. That assessment tool. That those were the heuristics, and those were obviously very web oriented and very adult focused, and not very kid or app or tablet or whatever experience. Product design, you could also say you need heuristics for that.
Definitely, and I think that it's weird that we don't have them yet, to be honest. We have so much that is focused on the digital aspects of things, but not that much on the physical products as well. And I think that's like, the more I've been in the field, the more I'm so actually curious how come that we don't have anything coming from the physical side of things. I think we have a bit of things, of course, from human factors and so on.
Yeah.
But like, not enough. And
right.
Yeah, and again, all the time when we have these talks, we're just like, somebody needs to look into this. Like, can we have a research project about this, please? So, and I definitely believe that this would be a great research question to work with, that looking into some heuristics for physical products as well, because there is some genetic ones there, exactly as it is on the digital side of things. Okay, one last question. So we have, what is your favorite Lego product?
I really like the whole Lego Ideas column of products or group of products, where fans with crazy passion and great skill come up with ideas, and it's so much fun to go on ideas.lego.com and just see what they propose. Some of the ideas are very cultural, where it maybe connects to a cultural phenomena or like a TV show, or some others are just scenarios. They're making a jungle theme, or they're making some. It's so much fun. It shows you how broad of a spectrum the Lego brick. It invites creativity that is so boundless, and it just reminds me every time how fun that is and how creative people are.
That sounds great. Now I need to go in and look as well.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and vote, register.
That's awesome. But Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today. And I definitely believe that was a very, very interesting talk. And it has sparked a lot of different thoughts and ideas in my mind as well. And I definitely believe that we should look into a book around the whole UX KPI and metric stuff. I think that there's just like a golden opportunity of actually working and sharing ideas in that perspective. So everybody who stayed, and that's actually quite a lot, thank you for today. And again, we will start up our meetups again in September, hopefully physically. And again, if you have any ideas or suggestions, please let us know, because we think this is so interesting to hear what you guys are up to within the different organizations and what is on the top of your mind right now. So let us know if we can help you dig into some of those topics. And Thomas, thank you for now.
Thank you,
See you
Tina.
around.
Thank you for all the good questions also. Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, awesome.
Mhm.
See you all later on and have a great summer.